The gunshot cracked through the frozen night. Close, too close. Clara's hand shook around the rifle stock, her breath ragged white clouds in the blackness. 20 feet away, yellow eyes gleamed in pairs. 6 wolves, maybe 7. Behind her, Ethan's voice cut sharp. Don't miss. She'd been a mail-order bride for exactly 3 days. 3 days ago, she'd stepped off a train into a stranger's life, trading everything she knew for a gamble on survival. Now wolves circled their cabin, and survival meant pulling this trigger. If you want to know how a city girl became the woman who wouldn't flinch, stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train lurched to a stop with a metallic groan that seemed to echo across the entire Montana territory. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hand against the frost-webbed window, trying to see anything beyond the white expanse that stretched in every direction. Nothing. Just snow, wind, and the skeletal outline of what might have been a station platform, or might have been a pile of lumber someone had abandoned mid-construction. She'd been traveling for 6 days. 6 days of rattling tracks, strange faces, and the growing weight of what she'd done settling into her bones like cold into January ground. The other passengers, miners mostly, and 2 women who wouldn't meet her eyes, had disembarked in Billings. She was the only one foolish enough to continue to Carter's Bend, a town so small it didn't warrant a dot on most maps. Mail-order bride. The words tasted like ash every time she thought them. Carter's Bend, the conductor called, his voice flat with the exhaustion of a man who'd made this run too many times. He didn't look at her when he said it, probably assumed she was making the biggest mistake of her life. He might have been right. Clara stood, her legs unsteady after hours of sitting. Her carpet bag felt heavier than it had when she'd packed it in Philadelphia, heavy with everything she'd chosen to carry and everything she'd chosen to leave behind. The black dress she wore had been her mother's. The ring on her right hand had been her grandmother's. The bruise on her ribs, hidden beneath whalebone and cotton, had been Thomas Whitmore's parting gift, her brother, her legal guardian. The man who'd drunk their father's inheritance down to nothing and decided Clara was worth more as commodity than kin. Marry well, he'd told her, his breath reeking of whiskey and entitlement. Or I'll marry you off myself. Your choice. So she'd chosen. Not well, maybe, but chosen nonetheless. The conductor offered his hand at the steps, and Clara took it because the platform was iced over and breaking her neck before even meeting the man seemed like poor planning. The wind hit her immediately, a physical thing, brutal and uncaring, that found every gap in her traveling cloak and exploited it. And there, standing beside a wagon that had seen better decades, was Ethan Rowe. She recognized him from the tintype he'd sent, though the photograph had been generous with shadows. He was taller than she'd expected, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of roughness that came from years of work, not weeks. His face was weathered, too young to look that old, too old to look that wary. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against wind-burned skin. His hat was pulled low, but she could see his eyes, blue-gray, like winter sky before a storm. He was watching her with the expression of a man assessing livestock. Not cruel, just practical. Clara lifted her chin and met his gaze straight on. She'd been assessed before. She knew how to stand like she had value. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind howled between them, carrying ice and the faint smell of wood smoke. The train hissed steam behind her, impatient to leave this frozen corner of nowhere. Miss Whitmore? His voice was deeper than she'd expected. Rough, but not unkind. Mr. Rowe. She kept her tone level. Steady, the way Mother had taught her before the fever took her. Never let them see you afraid, Clara. Fear is currency, and you don't spend it cheap. He nodded once, then moved toward her with economical steps, the gait of a man who didn't waste energy on unnecessary movement. When he reached for her bag, she let him take it. His hands were huge, scarred across the knuckles, and missing the tip of his left pinky finger. He noticed her noticing. Frostbite, he said simply. 2 winters back. I'm sorry. Don't be. Still got 9 others. He turned toward the wagon. We should go. Storm's coming in fast. Clara glanced at the sky. It looked the same as it had for the last 100 miles, low, gray, threatening. How can you tell? Smell it, feel it. He threw her bag into the wagon bed with a thud that made her wince. She had books in there, the few she'd managed to save, and turned back. You got other luggage? This is everything. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. He knew what it meant when a woman showed up with one bag. Knew what it meant when someone traveled light because they had nothing left to carry. All right then. He gestured to the wagon seat. Can you climb up or you need help? I can manage. She could. Barely. Her skirts caught on the wheel spoke and her boots slipped on the ice-slicked footboard, but she made it into the seat without falling. Small victories. Ethan swung up beside her with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and the wagon dipped under his weight. The train pulled away in a billow of steam and noise, and suddenly they were alone. Utterly, completely alone, in a landscape that seemed designed to swallow people whole. Ethan snapped the reins, and the horses, two massive draft animals that looked bored with existence, leaned into their harnesses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching over frozen ground. They rode in silence for the first mile. Clara kept her hands tucked into her muff, her face turned slightly away from the wind. She could feel Ethan's presence beside her, solid and quiet and making no attempt at conversation. Fine by her. She didn't have words for this yet, for what she was doing, where she was going, who she was becoming. The landscape rolled past in shades of white and gray. Bare trees clawed at the sky. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with comfort, beautiful like a knife edge, beautiful like danger. 20 miles to the homestead, Ethan said finally, his voice cutting through the wind. Give or take. We'll make it before dark if the weather holds. Clara nodded. 20 miles. She'd traveled 1,000 to get here, but somehow these last 20 felt longer than all the rest combined. You want to ask? He said after another stretch of silence. So ask. She glanced at him. His eyes were on the road, or what passed for a road out here, more of a suggestion than an actual path. Ask what? Why I sent for a wife instead of courting local. She had wondered. His letter had been blunt to the point of discomfort. Homesteader, 29. Need a wife for partnership, not romance. Hard work, harsh winters, no guarantees. Honest woman preferred. Write if interested. No poetry. No promises. Just facts. It's your business, Clara said. It's your business now, too. He shifted the reins to one hand, flexing the fingers of the other. Truth is, there aren't enough women out here to court. The ones that are here are already spoken for, or they're not interested in a man who's land poor and cash broke. He slid her a look. I'm guessing you had your reasons, too, for answering. I did. You running from something or toward something. Clara considered lying, considered the careful evasion she'd practiced on the train, but something about the way he asked, direct, without judgment, made her give him truth instead. Both, she said, running from a brother who drinks and gambles and thinks women are property, running toward something that's mine, something nobody can take away. Ethan nodded slowly. Fair enough. I can work with that. Can you? Better than working with a woman who thinks this will be easy or romantic. He gestured at the wilderness around them. This land doesn't care about fairy tales. It'll kill you quick if you're soft, slow if you're stubborn. I need someone who understands that. I understand it, Clara said, and meant it. She'd had her own fairy tales beaten out of her young. She knew exactly how the world worked. We'll see. He didn't sound skeptical, just realistic. Winter's the worst time to start, but it's when I could afford to send for you. Tax office gave me until spring to make improvements, or they'll auction the claim. I need help. You need a home. That's the bargain. And marriage. The word felt strange in her mouth. Heavy. Legal partnership. Protection for both of us. He glanced at her again, and this time she caught something harder in his expression. I won't touch you unless you want me to. That clear enough? Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. Clear. Good. Because I'm not interested in a wife who's afraid of me. Had enough of that growing up. There was a story there, dark and jagged, but Clara didn't push. She had her own stories. Maybe someday they'd trade them. Maybe not. The wind picked up, and Ethan frowned at the sky. We need to move faster. He urged the horses into a quicker pace, and the wagon bounced over ruts that Clara hadn't even seen. She gripped the seat to keep from being thrown, her teeth rattling with each impact. The temperature was dropping. She could feel it even through her layers, a cold that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. "Tell me about the homestead," she said, partly because she wanted to know, partly because talking seemed better than sitting in silence while the world turned white and hostile around them. 160 acres, river access, timber on the north side, good grazing if you can keep the cattle alive through winter, which most can't. He rattled it off like inventory. Got a cabin, solid walls, good roof, needs chinking, barns half built, corrals functional, 20 head of cattle, 4 horses, chickens if the foxes haven't gotten them. Neighbors? Closest is the Callahans, about 8 miles east. Good people. They'll help if we need it, and we'll do the same. He hesitated. After that, you're looking at 12, 15 miles between folks. This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Whitmore. You can't walk to a store. You can't knock on a neighbor's door for company. If something goes wrong, you handle it yourself, or you die waiting for help. I'm not afraid of isolation, Claire said. Maybe you should be. She turned to look at him fully. Are you trying to scare me? Because if you are, you should have done it in a letter before I spent every cent I had getting here. Ethan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. No. Just making sure you know what you're getting into. Last thing I need is a wife who spends all winter crying for home. I don't cry, Clara said. It wasn't quite true. She'd cried plenty when Mother died, when Father followed 6 months later when Thomas hit her hard enough to crack a rib. But it was true enough. She'd learned that tears changed nothing. Action did. We'll see, Ethan said again, and Clara felt a spike of irritation at the phrase. She was tired of being tested, tired of proving herself. But she swallowed it down because getting angry wouldn't help, and she'd learned that lesson young, too. The landscape shifted as they traveled. More trees now, the ground rolling into shallow valleys and rises. Ethan navigated by instinct, following paths Clara couldn't see. The horses knew the way too, their ears swiveling toward home. You got skills? Ethan asked. Cooking, sewing, that kind of thing? I can cook well enough to keep us alive. I can sew. I can read and write and do figures. She paused. I can shoot, if the gun isn't too heavy. That got his attention. He looked at her with something like interest. You hunt? My father taught me before he died. Rabbits, mostly. Birds. I'm better with a rifle than a shotgun. Good. That'll help. He shifted his weight and the wagon creaked. Out here, everyone works. There's no such thing as women's work or men's work. There's just work that needs doing. You'll feed animals, haul water, chop ice, split wood. If you can't handle that, I can handle it. You keep saying that. Because I mean it. He studied her for a long moment, and Clara refused to look away. She'd spent years being underestimated by men who thought softness meant weakness. She was done with it. Finally, Ethan nodded. All right, we'll find out soon enough. The storm hit an hour later. One moment, the sky was merely gray and threatening. The next, the world disappeared into white. Wind screamed across the open ground, driving snow horizontal, turning the air into a solid wall of cold and chaos. Clara gasped as ice hit her face like thrown sand, and Ethan swore, a short, vicious word, and hauled the horses to a halt. Cover your face, he shouted over the wind. We're too close to stop, but if you freeze, you're no good to anyone. Clara pulled her scarf up over her nose and mouth, tucking her chin down. The cold was immediate and invasive, finding every exposed inch of skin. Her eyes watered, her lungs burned. This wasn't weather, this was warfare. Ethan snapped the reins again, and the horses moved forward into the blizzard. Clara couldn't see anything beyond the wagon. No road, no landmarks, nothing. Just white noise and screaming wind and the certainty that they were going to die out here, frozen solid before they ever reached the homestead. But Ethan didn't stop. He kept the horses moving, his body hunched against the wind, his hands steady on the reins. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye and saw no panic, just grim determination. This is what you signed up for, she told herself. This is the bargain. Time lost meaning. They could have been traveling for 10 minutes or 2 hours. Clara had no way to tell. Her feet went numb. Her hands ached even inside her muff. The cold crept up her spine like fingers, digging into every vertebra. And then, through the white chaos, she saw a dark shape, a building, the cabin. Almost there, Ethan shouted. When we stop, you run for the door. Don't wait for me. Understand? Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see it. The wagon lurched to a halt, and Ethan was already moving, dropping the reins, swinging down, coming around to her side. He reached up, and Clara let him lift her down because her legs were too stiff to manage the climb alone. Her boots hit the ground, and she stumbled. Ethan caught her, one arm around her waist, solid as iron. "Go," he said, pointing. "Now." Clara ran. The distance to the cabin door couldn't have been more than 30 feet, but it felt like a mile. The wind shoved her sideways. Snow filled her mouth when she gasped for air. She couldn't feel her feet, couldn't tell if she was even moving in the right direction. But then the door was there, rough wood under her hands, and she shoved it open and fell inside. Warmth hit her like a fist. Not true warmth. The cabin was cold, the fire long dead, but compared to outside it felt like summer. Clara collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her whole body shaking. The door slammed open again, and Ethan staggered in, snow-covered and breathing hard. He kicked the door shut behind him and dropped the bar across it, sealing them in. For a moment they just stood there, two strangers in a dark cabin, listening to the storm try to claw its way inside. Then Ethan moved, all business. "We need fire. Fast. You able to help, or you going to pass out?" Clara pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest from every muscle. "I can help." "Good. There's kindling in the box by the hearth. Get it started while I deal with the horses." "The horses?" Clara stared at him. "You're going back out there? They'll die if I don't." He was already moving toward the door, grabbing a rope from a peg on the wall. "I'll get them in the barn, make sure they're fed. Shouldn't take long. You'll die if you go out there." Ethan looked at her, and his expression was patient in a way that made Clara feel like a child. "Miss Whitmore, those horses are worth more than both of us combined. We lose them, we lose everything. So yeah, I'm going back out. You get that fire going." He was gone before she could argue, the door slamming behind him, the storm swallowing him whole. Clara stood frozen for 5 seconds, 10, then forced herself to move. The hearth was easy to find even in the dim light, and the kindling box was where he'd said. Her hand shook as she arranged the wood, her fingers so cold they barely worked. She'd done this 100 times in Philadelphia, but never like this, never with the stakes so high. Matches. She needed matches. She found them on the mantel, her fingers fumbling with the tin. The first match broke. The second wouldn't strike. The third caught. A tiny flame that seemed impossibly fragile in the dark cabin. Clara cupped it with her hands and touched it to the kindling. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the wood caught, flames licking up, spreading, growing. She fed it carefully, more kindling, then small branches, then larger pieces, building heat and light. By the time Ethan came back, the fire was roaring. He looked half frozen, his face raw with cold, ice crusted in his beard. But he was alive. He dropped a load of supplies by the door, bags, rope, what looked like part of a saddle, and moved straight to the fire, holding his hands out to the heat. "Horses?" Clara asked. "Safe. Fed. Barn solid." His voice was hoarse. "We're lucky. Another hour out there, we'd have lost them." "Lucky," Clara repeated, though the word felt wrong for what they'd just survived. Ethan glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. "You did good, with the fire." It was a small thing, but Clara felt it settle in her chest like warmth. "Thank you." He nodded, then straightened, wincing. "We need to eat, then sleep. Storm might blow through by morning, might not. Either way, we're stuck here until it does." He moved to a shelf and pulled down supplies, jerky, hard biscuits, a jar of something that might have been preserves. Not much, but enough. He handed her half, and they ate standing by the fire, not speaking, just chewing and swallowing and trying to get warm from the inside out. The cabin was small, Clara realized now that she could see it. One room, maybe 15 by 20 feet, a bed in the corner, narrow and covered with rough blankets, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies, a trunk. That was it. No decoration, no softness, just survival. "You'll take the bed," Ethan said, following her gaze. "I'll sleep on the floor." "We could—" Clara stopped, heat flooding her face. "I mean, it's cold. We could share, for warmth." Ethan's expression didn't change. "We could, but we're not going to. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. He set his food aside. You've had a long trip. You need rest. I'm not going to make anything harder than it already is. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she was fine, that she could handle it, but the truth was she was exhausted, bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. And the thought of sharing a bed with a man she'd met 4 hours ago, no matter how practical, made her throat tight. All right, she said quietly. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's basic decency. He set about making a pallet on the floor near the fire, using blankets from the trunk and what looked like an old coat. Clara watched him work, this stranger who was now her husband in everything but final ceremony, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. When he finished, he straightened and looked at her. We'll make this work, he said, and it wasn't a question. But it'll take time, and it'll take honesty. So if something's not right, if you need something, or if I'm doing something wrong, you say so. Deal? Deal. Good. He gestured toward the bed. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. Clara moved to the bed, her legs heavy, her whole body aching. She sat down on the edge and unlaced her boots with numb fingers, then climbed under the blankets fully dressed. The mattress was thin, stuffed with straw probably, but after 6 days on a train it felt like heaven. She watched Ethan bank the fire, his movements economical and sure. Watched him check the door bar, the windows, the chimney flue, making sure they were safe, making sure they'd survived the night. Then he lay down on his pallet and pulled the blanket over himself, his back to her. Ethan? Clara said into the darkness. Yeah? I won't let you down. There was a long pause. Then, I know. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. And somewhere between those two sounds, Clara Whitmore closed her eyes and slept. When she woke, the storm was still screaming. Clara woke to a sound she couldn't identify at first, a deep, grinding roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She sat up too fast, her head spinning, her breath misting in the frigid air. The fire had died to coals, and the cabin was dark except for the faint gray light seeping through gaps in the shutters. The storm. Still going. Maybe worse than before. She swung her legs out of bed, wincing as her feet hit the frozen floor. Every muscle in her body protested. The train, the wagon ride, the desperate run through the blizzard had all caught up to her at once. She felt like she'd been beaten with a stick. Ethan's pallet was empty, the blankets thrown back. Clara's heart kicked hard in her chest. Where was he? Then the door rattled violently, and she heard his voice, muffled but urgent. Clara, the bar! She stumbled across the room, her fingers fumbling with the heavy wooden bar. The moment she lifted it, the door exploded inward, and Ethan fell through in a blast of wind and snow. He kicked the door shut behind him, his entire body coated in white, his face raw and bleeding from ice. Animals, he gasped, leaning against the door. Need to feed them. Water's frozen solid. Clara stared at him. You went out in this? Had to. Storm's been going 12 hours. Cattle will start dropping if they don't eat. He pushed off from the door, moving toward the fire. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold them out to the dying coals. Need to go back out. Break the ice on the water trough. Make sure the barn roof's holding. You're bleeding. Doesn't matter. You can't see straight. Doesn't matter. He grabbed a poker and jabbed at the coals, trying to coax them back to life. We lose those animals. We're done. You understand? Come spring, we'll have nothing to sell, nothing to breed, nothing to build on. The bank takes the land and we're both screwed. Clara watched him struggle with the fire, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. She'd seen men push themselves past breaking before. Her father, working himself sick trying to save the shop. Thomas, drinking himself stupid rather than face reality. She knew what desperation looked like. Let me help, she said. You can't. I didn't ask if I could. I said, let me help. She moved to the hearth, taking the poker from his frozen hands. Sit down before you fall down. I'll get the fire going. Clara, sit down. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then his knees buckled and he sank onto one of the chairs, his breathing ragged. Clara focused on the fire, feeding it kindling and small branches until flames caught and spread. Heat began to fill the cabin again, pushing back the cold. When she turned around, Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. All right, she said, keeping her voice level. What needs doing? You can't go out there. You don't know the property. You'll get lost 10 feet from the door. Then you'll have to come with me. But you're not going alone. She crossed her arms. We're partners, remember? You said so yourself. So either we do this together or we sit here and watch your cattle die. Your choice. Ethan's jaw worked. She could see him calculating, weighing options. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you do exactly what I say. No arguing, no hesitation. If I tell you to move, you move. Understand? I understand. Good. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing. We'll need to dress warm, layer everything you've got, cover your face, and stay close to me. I mean within arm's reach. The wind'll turn you around in seconds. They dressed quickly, Clara piling on every piece of clothing she'd brought until she could barely move. Ethan wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed, then tied a rope around her waist. He tied the other end around his own. Insurance, he said. We get separated, I can pull you back. Clara nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the walls, she could hear the storm shrieking like something alive and angry. Ethan picked up 2 heavy buckets and handed her one. We'll fill these with feed from the barn. Then we break ice and haul water. Should take an hour if we move fast. An hour. In that nightmare outside. Ready? He asked. No, Clara said honestly. But let's go anyway. The moment they stepped outside, the world tried to kill them. Wind hit like a living thing, shoving Clara sideways so hard she would have fallen if not for the rope connecting her to Ethan. Snow blinded her instantly, filling her eyes and nose and mouth. The cold was so intense it stopped being cold and became pure pain, every exposed inch of skin screaming. Ethan's hand clamped around her arm, and he pulled her close, his mouth near her ear. Follow my steps. Don't let go. They moved forward into the white chaos. Clara couldn't see the ground, couldn't see Ethan, even though he was right beside her. She just followed the pressure of his hand, the tug of the rope, trusting he knew where he was going. Every step was a fight. The wind shoved them backward, sideways, nearly off their feet. Snow drifted waist-high in places, and Clara floundered through it, her legs burning with effort. Her lungs felt like they were freezing from the inside out. Then suddenly there was darkness, a structure looming out of the white. The barn. Ethan hauled her inside, and the wind cut off like someone had slammed a door, which Clara realized as her eyes adjusted was exactly what had happened. The barn was warmer than outside, but not by much. She could see her breath in thick clouds. The animals, horses, cattle, a few chickens huddled in a corner, watched them with wild, frightened eyes. Feed, Ethan said, his voice hoarse. He moved to a barrel and started scooping grain into the buckets. Fill yours, we'll spread it out so they don't fight over it. Clara grabbed a scoop and started working, her hands so cold she could barely grip the handle. The grain smelled musty and sweet. One of the horses, a massive bay mare, pushed her nose against Clara's shoulder, searching for food. Easy, Clara murmured, though the horse probably couldn't hear her over the wind battering the barn walls. You'll get yours. They worked quickly, spreading feed along the stalls, making sure every animal got a share. The cattle were thin, too thin, and Clara saw Ethan's face tighten as he looked them over. They were losing condition fast. Winter was eating them alive. Water next, Ethan said. Troughs outside. We'll need to break the ice and keep it broken long enough for them to drink. Outside again. Clara's whole body rebelled at the thought, but she followed him back into the storm. The water trough was a solid block of ice, and breaking it required an axe that Ethan had to dig out from under 2 feet of snow. He swung it hard, the blade biting deep, sending shards flying, again and again, until finally a crack appeared, then a hole. Water underneath, black and frigid. He handed Clara the axe. Your turn. Keep it open while I get the animals out here. You're bringing them out in this? They need to drink. Can't do that inside. He was already moving back toward the barn. Just keep chopping. Don't let it freeze over. Clara lifted the axe, heavier than she expected, awkward in her gloved hands, and brought it down on the ice. The impact jarred her shoulders, but the hole widened slightly. She swung again. Her arms screamed, her back ached, but the hole stayed open. Ethan led the horses out first, one at a time, holding their halters as they drank. They were terrified, rolling their eyes at the wind, but thirsty enough to risk it. Then the cattle, moving in a nervous cluster, pushing each other to reach the water. Clara kept chopping. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of it. Lift, swing, strike. Lift, swing, strike. Ice chips stung her face. Her hands went numb inside her gloves. But she didn't stop. When the last animal finished drinking, Ethan got them back inside and returned to Clara. He took the axe from her hands. She hadn't realized she was still swinging it, mechanical and mindless, and set it down. "Done," he said. "We're done. Let's get back." The trip back to the cabin was worse than the trip out. Clara's legs barely worked. She stumbled and fell twice, and both times Ethan hauled her upright and kept her moving. The rope between them was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. When they finally crashed through the cabin door, Clara collapsed onto the floor and didn't move. She couldn't. Every part of her was frozen, exhausted, screaming. Ethan barred the door and dropped down beside her. For a long time, they just lay there, breathing, trying to remember what warmth felt like. "We have to do that again," he said eventually, "in a few hours. Then again after that, until the storm breaks." Clara turned her head to look at him. His face was gray with exhaustion, the cut on his cheek still bleeding sluggishly. "How long can this last?" "Days, sometimes. I've seen storms go 4 or 5 days straight." He closed his eyes. "We'll manage. We have to." Clara wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to walk out that door and keep walking until she hit civilization, but instead she pushed herself up onto her elbows and said, "Then we need food, and dry clothes, and rest while we can." Ethan opened one eye and looked at her. "You're tougher than you look." "I'd have to be," Clara said, "to be this stupid." That got a sound out of him, not quite a laugh, but close. He sat up, grimacing. "All right, let's get warm." They peeled off their frozen outer layers, hanging them near the fire to dry. Underneath, Clara's dress was damp with sweat and melted snow. She was shivering so hard her teeth rattled. Ethan pulled out a trunk and tossed her something, a shirt, oversized and worn soft with washing. "It's clean. Change into it. You'll freeze in wet clothes." Clara hesitated, then took it. "Turn around." He did, without comment. She changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons and laces. The shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves up 3 times, but it was dry, and that was enough. She kept her underthings on for warmth and modesty both. "Decent," she said. Ethan turned back and handed her a blanket. Then he changed his own shirt, and Clara carefully studied the fire instead of watching him. She'd seen men's bodies before, her father, her brother, but this felt different, more intimate. Like crossing a line she wasn't ready to cross yet. When he was done, he moved to the shelf and pulled down more food, jerky again, and hardtack, and the jar of preserves that turned out to be some kind of berry compote. They ate sitting on the floor near the fire, too tired to bother with the table. "Your family," Ethan said after a while. "You said your brother drank. What about the rest?" Clara chewed slowly, considering how much to say. "Mother died when I was 15, a fever. Father held on for another year, but I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything. Thomas inherited everything. He was supposed to take care of me. He didn't. No, he took care of himself. Drank away the shop, the house, everything of value. When there was nothing left, he decided I was valuable." She set down her food, her appetite gone. "He had a friend, a businessman, 50 years old, 3 dead wives. Thomas wanted to sell me to him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you ran." "I answered your ad instead. Seemed like the better option." Marrying a stranger in the middle of nowhere seemed better than staying. Clara met his eyes. "Yes? Because at least you were honest about what you wanted. At least you gave me a choice." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father used to beat my mother. Started before I was born, didn't stop until she died. He'd get drunk, get mean, and she'd just take it. Never fought back. Never left." His hands curled into fists. "I swore I'd never be that man. Never raise a hand to a woman, never trap one somewhere she didn't want to be. Is that why you sent for a mail-order bride? Because you were afraid of becoming him?" "Partly. Mostly because I wanted someone who chose this life knowing what it was. Not some girl with romantic ideas who'd hate me when reality hit." He glanced at her. "I'm not easy to live with. I work too much. I don't talk much. I've got a temper when things go wrong, though I keep it to myself. You deserve to know that." "I appreciate the honesty," Clara said. And she did. She'd had enough of men who lied, who hid their cruelty behind smiles until it was too late to escape. Your turn, Ethan said. What am I getting into with you? Clara considered. I'm stubborn. I don't take orders well. I have nightmares sometimes, from my mother's death mostly. I talk to myself when I'm working. She paused. And I don't forgive easily. You hurt me, betray me, lie to me. There's no coming back from that. Fair enough? Ethan stood, stretching until his back cracked. We should sleep while we can. We'll need to feed the animals again in a few hours. Clara looked at the narrow bed, then at Ethan. We could share, for warmth. I know you said, I meant it. You take the bed. But you'll freeze on the floor. I've slept in worse places. He started arranging his pallet. I'll be fine. Clara wanted to argue, but she could see he wouldn't budge. So she climbed into the bed and pulled the blankets up, watching as he settled onto the floor near the fire. Ethan? Yeah? Thank you for being decent. You already thanked me for that. I know, but I mean it. He was quiet for a long moment, then, get some sleep, Clara. She closed her eyes and listened to the storm rage outside. Listened to Ethan's breathing slow and even out. And somewhere between one breath and the next, she slept. She woke to pain. It started as a dull ache in her right ankle and bloomed into something sharp and vicious when she tried to stand. Clara gasped and sat back down hard on the bed, her vision graying at the edges. What happened? Ethan was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders. Clara, my ankle. She tried to rotate it and bit back a cry. I don't know. I must have twisted it yesterday in the snow. Ethan knelt down and carefully pulled off her boot. Even through her stocking, Clara could see the swelling. Her ankle was twice its normal size, mottled with bruises. Damn it. Ethan's voice was tight. Can you put weight on it? Clara tried. Pain shot up her leg, white-hot and nauseating. She shook her head. Then you're staying here. He was already moving, pulling on his coat. Storms died down some, but the animals still need tending. I'll go alone. No. Clara grabbed his arm. You said it yourself. You can't do this alone, not for days on end. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. Give me something to bind it with. I can walk if it's supported. Clara, we're partners, she said, echoing his own words back at him. That means we both pull our weight. I'm not lying here useless while you work yourself to death. Ethan stared at her, his face a mask of frustration. Then he swore under his breath and went to the trunk. He came back with strips of cloth, torn from an old shirt by the look of it, and knelt down again. This is going to hurt, he warned. I know. He wrapped her ankle carefully but tightly, binding it until the joint was immobilized. Clara gritted her teeth through the pain, refusing to make a sound. When he finished, he sat back on his heels. Try it now. Clara stood slowly, testing her weight. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, but manageable. She could walk, if she was careful. It'll work. You're insane. Probably. She reached for her boots. But I'm also right. You need help. They went out together into the storm. It was marginally better than yesterday. Clara could see maybe 20 feet instead of 2, but still brutal. The wind cut through her layers like they were nothing. Snow was drifted up to the cabin windows in places, and every step was a battle. Her ankle screamed with each footfall, but Clara ignored it. She'd learned long ago how to function through pain. You just put it in a box in your mind and kept moving. The animals were in bad shape. One of the cattle was down, too weak to stand. Ethan spent 20 minutes trying to get it upright while Clara spread feed for the others. The cow finally made it to its feet, trembling and glassy-eyed. It won't last another day, Ethan said quietly. We're going to lose it. Can we bring it inside? Into the barn at least? Won't make a difference. It's too far gone. He ran a hand over his face. We'll lose more before this is over. Just have to accept it. Clara hated the defeat in his voice. Hated that there was nothing they could do but watch the storm eat away at everything they had. They broke ice on the water trough again, Clara swinging the axe despite the agony in her ankle. Ethan tried to take it from her twice, and both times she refused. If she stopped moving, she'd collapse. She knew that much. By the time they made it back to the cabin, Clara was barely conscious. She stumbled through the door and made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. Enough, he said, his voice rough. You've done enough. He carried her to the bed. She was too weak to protest, and laid her down gently. Then he pulled off her boots and unwrapped her ankle. The swelling was worse, the bruising darker. "I'm getting ice," he said. "We need to keep the swelling down or you'll do permanent damage." He went outside and came back with a bucket of snow, packing it around her ankle in a makeshift compress. The cold was excruciating at first, then numbing. Clara lay back and stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the pain. "Why'd you come out here?" Ethan asked. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on her leg just above the injury. Not intimate, just anchoring. "Really? You could have stayed east, found work, made a life." "What kind of life?" Clara's voice was bitter. "As a seamstress making pennies? A shop girl working 14-hour days? Maybe I'd get lucky and find a husband, some clerk or factory worker who'd want me to keep his house and raise his children and never ask for anything more." She turned her head to look at him. "I wanted more. I wanted something that was mine, even if it kills me." "It might," Ethan said bluntly. "This life doesn't forgive weakness. Then I'll get stronger." He studied her for a long moment. "You might at that." The storm raged for 3 more days. They fell into a brutal rhythm: sleep a few hours, wake to feed the animals, collapse, repeat. Clara's ankle didn't heal, but she learned to work through the pain. She learned to read the storm's moods, to move through the drifts, to break ice and haul water and do a dozen other tasks she'd never imagined needing to know. They lost 2 cattle. One just gave up and lay down in the snow to die. The other broke a leg trying to reach water and had to be put down. Ethan shot it himself, quick and clean, then stood in the snow staring at the carcass for a long time. "Can't afford this," he said when Clara came to stand beside him. "Can't afford to lose any more." "We'll make it work," Clara said, though she had no idea how. On the 4th day, the wind finally stopped. Clara woke to silence, real silence, not just a lull between gusts, and sat up so fast she jarred her ankle. She bit back a curse and limped to the window, pushing open the shutter. Blue sky. Clear, painfully bright, stretching from horizon to horizon. The world was buried under feet of snow, but the storm had passed. "It's over," she said, her voice cracking. Ethan appeared beside her, looking out at the transformed landscape. His face was haggard, gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. "For now," he said, "another one will come. They always do." But Clara saw the relief in the set of his shoulders, the way he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. They'd survived. Barely, but they had. They spent the morning digging out, clearing paths to the barn, checking on the animals, assessing the damage. The 2 dead cattle were frozen solid, and Ethan marked them for butchering when the ground thawed. "Waste not," he said. They'd use every part. Clara's ankle was still bad, but the swelling had gone down. She could walk without wanting to scream, which counted as progress. As they worked, the neighbors appeared, the Callahans riding in on horseback with supplies. John Callahan was a big man with kind eyes, and his wife Mary was small and fierce and took one look at Clara's ankle and started barking orders. "You should be off that," Mary said, her accent thick. Irish, Clara thought. "What were you thinking, working in your condition?" "She was thinking we'd lose everything if she didn't," Ethan said. There was something in his voice Clara hadn't heard before. Respect, maybe, or gratitude. Mary sniffed. "Men, always thinking work's the only thing that matters." She turned to Clara. "You'll come to our place, rest properly. Let that ankle heal." "I can't leave Ethan to—" "I'll manage," Ethan said. "Mary's right. You need to heal." Clara wanted to argue, but the truth was she could barely stand. And the thought of resting, of not having to fight for every breath, was almost painfully appealing. "Just for a few days," she said finally. "Long as it takes," Mary said firmly. "John, help her onto the horse." Clara let herself be helped, her body too worn down to protest. As John settled her in front of him on the saddle, she looked back at Ethan. He was standing in the snow, watching her go, and for just a moment his guard dropped. She saw how tired he was, how close to breaking, how much the last few days had cost him. "Come get me when you need me," she called. He nodded once. "I will." And somehow, Clara believed him. The Callahan homestead was twice the size of Ethan's, with a proper barn, a chicken coop that didn't lean, and a cabin that had actual glass windows. Mary settled Clara into a chair by the fire and immediately started fussing, unwrapping the ankle, clucking her tongue at the bruising, rewrapping it with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky it's not broken," Mary said, her hands gentle despite her sharp tone. "Though the way you've been using it, you're doing your best to finish the job. I didn't have much choice." "There's always a choice. Sometimes they're all bad, but there's still choices." Mary stood and moved to the stove, where something was simmering that smelled like heaven. "You'll stay off it for at least a week. No arguments." Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Mary Callahan was maybe 5 feet tall and couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds, but she had the presence of someone much larger. The kind of woman who'd birthed 6 children and buried 2 and still got up every morning to do what needed doing. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "Good. Smart girl." Mary ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to her. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." She hadn't. The soup was thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, seasoned with herbs Clara couldn't identify. She ate slowly, trying not to wolf it down like an animal, but it was hard. Her body was screaming for fuel. Mary watched her with knowing eyes. "Ethan's a good man, but he doesn't know how to take care of people. Just animals and land. You'll have to teach him." "I'm not sure I know how either." "Then you'll both learn." Mary sat down across from her, her own bowl in hand. "Marriage is like that, especially out here. You figure it out as you go or you don't make it." Clara set down her spoon. "How long have you and John been married?" 23 years, met him in New York, came out here on a promise and a prayer." She smiled, but it was tired. "Lost our first 2 babies to fever. Nearly lost myself. But we kept going. Built this place from nothing. Now we've got 4 healthy children and enough land to make it worth something." "Do you ever regret it, coming out here?" Mary was quiet for a long moment, staring into her soup. "Every winter," she said finally. "Every time the wind howls and the cold gets so deep you think you'll never be warm again. Every time we lose livestock or crops fail or one of the children gets sick." She looked up and her eyes were fierce. "But then spring comes, and the land gives back what it took. And I remember why we stayed." Clara absorbed that, turning it over in her mind. "Ethan said we'll lose the homestead if we can't make improvements by spring. The tax office will auction it." "He tell you how much he owes?" "No." $200, maybe $250, depending on penalties. Mary's mouth thinned. "It's not impossible, but it'll take everything you've got. You'll need to sell cattle, probably. Maybe horses. Pray the prices hold. $200. It might as well have been $2,000. Clara had arrived with $17 to her name, and she'd given Ethan 10 of it for supplies. Even if they sold every animal they had, there was no guarantee they'd make enough. "We'll figure it out," Clara said, though she had no idea how. "You will, or you won't." Mary stood and took Clara's empty bowl. "Either way, you'll survive. That's what we do out here. We survive." Clara spent 5 days at the Callahan homestead, and every day felt like a betrayal. She should have been with Ethan, helping him dig out from the storm, tending the animals, making repairs. Instead, she was lying around like an invalid while Mary fed her, and John's children stared at her like she was a curiosity. The oldest, a girl named Margaret, who couldn't have been more than 12, kept trying to talk to her about Philadelphia. "Is it true the buildings are so tall you can't see the sky?" Margaret asked one afternoon, her eyes wide. "Some of them," Clara said. "Not as tall as mountains, but tall enough." "And there's stores where you can buy anything you want?" "If you have money." "Do people really wear different clothes every day?" Clara thought of her one good dress, now hanging in Ethan's cabin, and the 2 work dresses she'd brought that were already showing wear. "Some people do, most don't." Margaret absorbed this with the intensity of someone cataloging every detail for future reference. She reminded Clara of herself at that age, hungry for a world beyond the one she'd been born into. "You miss it?" Margaret asked. "The city?" Did she? Clara considered. She missed hot baths and books and the ability to walk to a market without risking her life. But she didn't miss the noise, the crowds, the constant sense of being trapped in someone else's idea of what her life should be. "Sometimes," she said, "but I don't want to go back." "Why not?" "Because here, I get to decide what my life looks like, even if it's hard, even if I fail." She looked at Margaret. "That's worth more than comfort." The girl thought about that, then nodded slowly. I think I understand. On the 6th day, Ethan came for her. Clara heard the horse before she saw him, and her heart kicked hard in her chest. She was sitting by the window, her ankle propped up, pretending to read one of Mary's books. But the moment she heard hoofbeats, she was on her feet, or trying to be. Her ankle protested, but it held. Ethan swung down from the saddle, looking like he'd aged a year and 6 days. His face was drawn, stubbled with a week's worth of beard, and his eyes had a haunted quality that made Clara's chest tight. Mary came out to meet him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You look like hell, Ethan Rowe." "Feel like it, too." His eyes found Clara through the window, and something in his expression eased. "I need her back." "Her ankle's still healing." "I know, but I need her anyway." Mary studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, but you take care of her, you hear? She pushes herself too hard." "I know that too." Clara was already gathering her things, the few possessions she'd brought, the supplies Mary had insisted she take. Her hands were shaking, though she couldn't have said why. Nerves, maybe. Or relief. Or something else she didn't have a name for yet. When she stepped outside, Ethan was waiting. He looked her over, his gaze lingering on her ankle. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can manage." "That's not what I asked." Clara met his eyes. "Yes, I can ride." He nodded and helped her into the saddle, his hand steady on her waist, lifting her like she weighed nothing. Clara settled into the seat and took the reins, her ankle throbbing but functional. "Thank you," Ethan said to Mary, "for taking care of her. Just don't make me do it again any time soon." Mary's tone was stern, but her eyes were kind. "And come by next week. We'll have extra milk." They rode back in silence, the horses picking their way through snow that was starting to melt in patches. The sun was bright, almost painful, and the air had lost some of its vicious edge. Not warm, but less actively hostile. "How bad was it?" Clara asked finally. "Lost another cow. Barn roof leaked, soaked half the hay. Had to dig out the well because the whole thing froze solid." Ethan's voice was flat, reciting facts. "Spent 2 days chopping ice and hauling water from the river. I should have been there." "You were hurt." "So were you." He glanced at her. "I heal fast." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Clara searched for the right words. "The point is, we're supposed to be doing this together. You sent for a partner, not a burden." "You're not a burden. Then stop treating me like one." Ethan was quiet for a long stretch, then, "Fair enough." They reached the homestead as the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. The cabin looked small and lonely against the vast white landscape, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. But it looked like home in a way it hadn't before Clara left. Maybe because she knew what it had cost to keep it standing. Ethan helped her down, and Clara stood for a moment just looking at the place. The barn with its patched roof, the corral where the surviving cattle huddled together for warmth, the woodpile that Ethan had clearly been working through at an alarming rate. "I'll get a fire going," Ethan said. "You should rest." "I've been resting for 6 days. I'm done resting." "Clara, I mean it, Ethan. Put me to work or I'll find work myself." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "All right, but nothing that puts weight on that ankle. You can sort through the supplies, figure out what we need. I'll handle the heavy work." It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara nodded and limped inside. The cabin was colder than she remembered, and messier. Dishes piled by the basin, clothes thrown over chairs, the bed unmade. Ethan had been surviving, not living. Clara felt a pang of something, guilt, maybe, or sympathy, and pushed it down. Emotions didn't fix problems. Action did. She built up the fire first, then started organizing. Supplies needed inventory. Dishes needed washing. The floor needed sweeping. She worked methodically, ignoring the throb in her ankle, falling into a rhythm that felt almost meditative. By the time Ethan came back in, the cabin looked habitable again. He stopped in the doorway, taking it in. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to." "Your ankle is fine. Stop worrying about it." He closed the door and leaned against it, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're stubborn. You know that?" "You mentioned it before." Clara set down the broom and faced him. "Are you complaining?" "No, just observing." He moved past her to the stove, where he'd left a pot of something simmering. "You eat yet?" "Not since breakfast." "Then sit." I'll get food. They ate together at the small table, bowls of thin stew that was mostly broth and potatoes, but filled the hollow spaces. Clara watched Ethan eat, the way he hunched over his bowl, the way his hands shook slightly from exhaustion. He was running on fumes, had been for days, and it showed. You need sleep, she said. Later. Ethan, I said later. His voice was sharp, and Clara blinked at the edge in it. He saw her reaction, and his shoulders slumped. Sorry, I'm just tired. I know. That's why you need to sleep. Can't. There's too much to do. He stood and carried his bowl to the basin. Fence is down on the south side. Needs fixing before the cattle wander. And I need to check the traps, see if we caught anything. And it'll all still be there in the morning. Clara stood too, moving to block his path to the door. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. So you're going to sleep. Now. Clara, I'm not asking. They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Clara could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he exhaled hard and nodded. Fine, but just a few hours. We'll see. He didn't argue, just moved to the bed and sat down heavily. He didn't bother undressing, just lay back and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing evened out into sleep. Clara watched him for a moment, this man who'd taken her in sight unseen, who'd worked himself half to death trying to keep them both alive. Then she pulled a blanket over him and went back to her work. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of Ethan thrashing in his sleep. He was on the bed, still fully dressed, his face twisted with whatever dream had him in its grip. Clara hesitated, then moved closer. Ethan, she said softly, wake up. He jerked awake with a gasp, his hand going to his hip like he was reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. His eyes were wild, unfocused. It's just me, Clara said, keeping her voice calm. You were dreaming. Ethan blinked, orienting himself. Then he scrubbed a hand over his face and sat up. Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's fine. What were you dreaming about? Doesn't matter. Ethan, I said it doesn't matter. He stood, putting distance between them. I'm going to check the animals. It's the middle of the night. So? He was gone before she could argue, the door slamming behind him. Clara stood in the empty cabin, frustration and worry warring in her chest. She knew about nightmares, knew about the things that chased you in the dark, but she also knew you couldn't outrun them. You had to face them, or they'd consume you. She gave him 10 minutes, then pulled on her coat and followed. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Clara found Ethan in the barn, standing in front of the surviving cattle, just watching them breathe. You want to talk about it? She asked. No. Too bad. I'm asking anyway. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, it was my father, in the dream. He was here, in this barn, and he trailed off, his jaw working. It doesn't matter. He's dead. Has been for 5 years. But you still dream about him, sometimes. Ethan turned to face her. He used to take me out here, to the barn on his place. When he was too drunk to hit my mother where people could see, he'd beat me instead. Told me I was worthless. Told me I'd never amount to anything. His voice was flat, emotionless. I left the day after my mother died. Never looked back. Clara's chest ached for the boy he'd been, trapped and helpless. I'm sorry. Don't be. I survived. That's what matters. Surviving isn't the same as living. Ethan looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're still letting him win. You're still out here, alone, working yourself to death because you're afraid if you stop, if you let anyone in, you'll become him. She took a step closer. But you won't. You're nothing like him. You don't know that. You barely know me. I know you could have hurt me a dozen times by now, and you haven't. I know you work until you break rather than ask for help. I know you sent for a wife because you were lonely, but you're too scared to admit it. She met his eyes. I know enough. Ethan stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. Then he turned away, his shoulders tight. We should get back inside. It's too cold out here. Clara let him retreat because she understood the need for it. Some wounds couldn't be healed in a single conversation. But as they walked back to the cabin, she felt something shift between them. A door opening, just a crack. The wolves came 3 days later. Clara heard them first, a sound like wind, but wrong. Too rhythmic, too purposeful. She was outside, scattering feed for the chickens, when the hair on the back of her neck stood up. She turned slowly and saw them at the edge of the trees. 6 of them. Maybe 7. Yellow eyes watching her with the kind of focus that made her blood run cold. "Ethan," she called, keeping her voice level, "we have company." He came out of the barn, took one look at the wolves, and swore, "Get inside, now." "What about you?" "I'll get the rifle. Just go." Clara backed toward the cabin, her eyes never leaving the wolves. They didn't move, just watched, waiting. One of them, the largest, a gray beast with scarred ears, took a step forward. Then another. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd seen wolves before from a distance, but never like this, never close enough to see the hunger in their eyes. Ethan appeared beside her with the rifle, and the wolves scattered back into the trees. But they didn't leave. Clara could still see their shapes moving in the shadows, circling. "They're starving," Ethan said quietly. "Storm killed off most of the game. Now they're looking for easier prey. The cattle. Or us, if we're stupid enough to give them a chance." He checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded. "We need to keep watch, day and night. If they get brave enough to attack, we'll have maybe seconds to react." Clara felt the weight of that settle over her like a shroud. How long will they stay? Until they find food somewhere else, or until we kill enough of them to make the rest leave. He glanced at her. "You said you can shoot?" "Yes." "Good. You'll need to." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Ethan brought the cattle closer to the barn, into a smaller corral where they could defend them more easily. He set up a watch post near the cabin with a clear view of the animals, and he showed Clara how to load and fire his rifle, a heavy, unwieldy thing that made her shoulders ache just holding it. "You aim for the chest," he said, guiding her hands. "Headshots are too risky. You miss, you just make them mad. And if I hit, then you put it down. 1 shot, 1 kill." He stepped back. "Try it." Clara raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at a tree stump 30 yards away. The weight threw off her balance, and her first shot went wide. The recoil nearly knocked her over. "Again," Ethan said. She fired again. Closer this time, but still off target. Again. By the 10th shot, her shoulder was screaming and her hands were shaking, but she hit the stump dead center. Ethan nodded, satisfied. "You'll do." That night, they took turns on watch. Ethan first, then Clara. She sat in the dark with the rifle across her lap, listening to the sounds of the night. The wind, the cattle shifting nervously, and underneath it all, the occasional howl that made her skin crawl. When Ethan relieved her at midnight, she stumbled to the bed and fell asleep instantly. But it felt like she'd barely closed her eyes when he was shaking her awake. "They're here," he said. "Get up." Clara grabbed the rifle and followed him outside. The wolves were closer now, maybe 15 feet from the corral. The cattle were going mad, bellowing and shoving against the fence. One of the wolves, the big gray, was testing the barrier, looking for weakness. "We need to scare them off," Ethan said. "If they breach the fence, we'll lose everything." He fired a shot into the air, and the wolves scattered. But they didn't go far, just back to the tree line, regrouping. "They're not giving up," Clara said. "No, they're too hungry." Ethan reloaded. "We'll have to kill one, make an example. Or we give them something else to eat." He looked at her sharply. "What?" "The cattle we lost in the storm, the carcasses. They're frozen, but they're still meat." Clara's mind was racing. "We drag them away from the homestead, lead the wolves somewhere else." Ethan considered it. "That might work, but it's risky. We'd have to get close to them." "Everything's risky. At least this way we don't waste bullets." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We try it your way. But if they attack, we shoot to kill. Understood?" "Understood." They worked fast, hitching one of the horses to the dead cattle and dragging them a quarter-mile from the cabin. The wolves followed at a distance, shadows among shadows. When Ethan cut the ropes and let the carcasses drop, the pack surged forward. "Run," Ethan said. "Now." They ran, the horse galloping ahead of them, and behind them Clara could hear the sounds of feeding, snarls and tearing flesh and the crack of bones. She didn't look back, didn't want to see. They made it to the cabin and barred the door, both of them breathing hard. Outside, the wolves devoured their offering, and for the moment, the cattle were safe. That was smart, Ethan said. Quick thinking. It bought us time, that's all. Clara set down the rifle, her hands trembling with adrenaline. They'll be back when the meat's gone. Maybe, but maybe by then they'll have found something else. They stood in the dark cabin, listening to the distant sounds of the pack, and Clara felt the fragile nature of their survival. One wrong move, one bad decision, and it could all fall apart. But they were still standing, still fighting, and that would have to be enough. The wolves came back the next night, and this time there was no scaring them off. They hit the corral with single-minded determination, trying to tear through the fence. The cattle were screaming, their eyes rolling white with terror. Ethan fired first, dropping the big gray with a shot to the chest. The wolf went down hard, twitching, and the others scattered, but only for a moment. Then they were back, more aggressive, more desperate. "Clara!" Ethan shouted. "Take the left side." She raised the rifle, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. A wolf broke from the pack, heading straight for a gap in the fence. Clara tracked it, waiting for a clear shot. The wolf was fast, too fast, and her hands were shaking. "Shoot!" Ethan's voice cut through her panic. Clara pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard enough to bruise, and the wolf went down, tumbling end over end before going still. Clara stared at it, unable to process what she'd just done. "Good shot," Ethan said. "Reload, they're coming back." He was right. The pack regrouped, and for a moment Clara thought they'd attack again. But then the lead wolf, a smaller female with matted fur, looked at the two bodies, looked at Ethan and Clara standing their ground, and made a decision. She turned and melted into the darkness. The others followed. "They're gone," Ethan said. He lowered his rifle, his shoulders sagging. For now, anyway. Clara set down her weapon with shaking hands. She'd killed something, taken a life. It didn't matter that it was a wolf, didn't matter that it was necessary. The weight of it settled into her bones like lead. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "I don't know." Her voice came out small. I didn't think it would feel like this." He moved closer, his hand settling on her shoulder. "Never gets easier. You just learn to live with it." Clara looked up at him, and in the moonlight she could see the same weight in his eyes. The same knowledge that survival sometimes required terrible things. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get inside." They buried the wolves the next morning, dragging them far from the homestead and covering them with rocks. It felt important somehow, acknowledging what had happened, what it had cost. When they finished, Ethan stood looking out at the horizon. The sun was bright, the snow starting to melt in earnest. Spring wasn't here yet, but it was coming. "We made it," he said quietly, through the worst of it. Clara stood beside him, her ankle still aching, her shoulder bruised from the rifle, her hands raw from work. But she was alive. They both were. "Yeah," she said. "We did." And for the first time since stepping off that train, Clara felt something besides fear and determination. She felt hope. The days after the wolves left were different. Quieter, but not peaceful. The cattle had survived, but they were gaunt and skittish, jumping at every sound. The chickens had stopped laying almost entirely, and the supplies were running lower than Clara wanted to think about. She was in the cabin, taking inventory for the third time in as many days, when Ethan came in carrying an armload of firewood. His face was grim. "We need to talk," he said, dropping the wood by the hearth. Clara set down her pencil. "How bad?" "Bad enough." He pulled out a chair and sat, his movements heavy. "I did the numbers. We've got maybe 6 weeks of food if we stretch it, less if we can't supplement with hunting or trapping. And the money for the tax office? We'll need to sell cattle, at least half the herd." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Problem is, prices are down. Storm hit everyone, not just us. Supplies up, demand's down. We'll be lucky to get $70 for the lot." Clara felt her stomach drop. "That's not even half of what we need." "I know. What about the horses?" "Need them for work. Can't run a homestead without horses." He looked at her, and she could see the defeat creeping into his eyes. "I've been over it 100 times. There's no way to make the numbers work." Clara stood and moved to the window, staring out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. Snow was melting in patches, revealing brown grass and frozen mud. In a few weeks, it would be beautiful. green and alive and full of possibility, if they were still here to see it. There has to be something, she said. Something we're not thinking of. Like what? Rob a bank? Ethan's laugh was bitter. I'm open to suggestions, Clara, but I've lived this life for 3 years. I know what's possible and what's not. So we just give up? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? He was quiet for a long moment, then, I'm saying maybe you should leave while you still can, before this whole thing collapses. Clara turned to face him, her chest tight with something hot and furious. Excuse me? You heard me. Ethan wouldn't meet her eyes. You've got skills. You could find work in Billings, maybe even make it back east. You don't have to go down with this ship. And you? What would you do? I'd figure something out. Hire on his ranch hand somewhere. Move on. He shrugged, but the gesture was hollow. I've started over before. So that's it? Clara's voice was shaking now. We hit one obstacle and you're ready to throw it all away? Send me packing like I'm some kind of temporary arrangement? That's exactly what you are. A temporary arrangement. We haven't even... He stopped, shaking his head. We're not really married, Clara. Not in any way that matters. You don't owe me anything. Maybe I don't. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, forcing him to look at her. But I'm choosing to stay anyway, because I meant what I said when I stepped off that train. I'm done running. I'm done being scared, and I'm sure as hell done with men telling me what I should do. This isn't about telling you what to do. It's about being practical. Practical? Clara laughed, sharp and humorless. There's nothing practical about any of this. Marrying a stranger, moving to the middle of nowhere, fighting wolves in the middle of the night. But we did it anyway, and we survived. So don't you dare start talking about practical now. Ethan stood, his face flushed. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to push me away before I can leave on my own. The words hit their mark. She saw it in the way his expression crumpled, the way he turned away from her like he couldn't bear to be seen. My whole life, he said quietly. Everyone who was supposed to stay left. My mother died. My father drank himself to death. The few friends I had moved on to better things. His voice cracked. I'm not pushing you away because I want to. I'm doing it because it's easier than watching you realize you made a mistake and leave anyway. Clara felt something break open in her chest. She moved closer, close enough to touch him, and put her hand on his arm. I'm not leaving, she said. I'm not your mother. I'm not your father. I'm here and I'm staying, and you need to decide if you can accept that. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Why? Because I don't want to do this alone anymore. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't need anyone. She took a breath. Because in the last few weeks, you've shown me more respect and decency than any man I've ever known, and that means something. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, and Clara could see him fighting with himself. Then, slowly, his hand came up to cover hers. I don't know how to do this, he said. How to be this. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. And if we can't, then we'll fail together instead of alone. That's the deal. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You're really stubborn, you know that? You've mentioned it. Clara squeezed his arm. Now can we stop talking about me leaving and start figuring out how to save this place? Yeah. He nodded, and some of the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Yeah, we can do that. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Ethan would take half the cattle to Billings and sell them for whatever he could get. Clara would stay at the homestead and keep things running. It wasn't ideal. Being alone again made her nervous after the wolves. But they didn't have much choice. I'll be gone 4 days, maybe 5, Ethan said, packing supplies into his saddlebags. You'll need to keep the rifle close. Check the traps every day. And if anything feels wrong, if you see wolves or strangers or anything that spooks you, you bar the door and you wait it out. Don't try to be a hero. I'm not an idiot, Ethan. I know, but I also know you'll do what needs doing, even if it's dangerous. He looked at her seriously. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. Clara paused. You too. Those roads are still bad, and cattle aren't easy to move alone. I've done it before. That doesn't make it safe. He smiled then. A real smile that made him look younger. Yes, ma'am. He left before dawn the next morning, driving the cattle ahead of him into the gray light. Clara stood in the doorway and watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then went back inside to the empty cabin. The silence was immediate and oppressive. She'd gotten used to having another person around. The sound of Ethan moving through the space, his quiet presence. Now it felt like the walls were closing in. She threw herself into work to keep from thinking about it. Fed the remaining animals, checked the traps, hauled water, chopped wood. Her ankle was mostly healed now, though it still ached when the weather changed. She'd learned to ignore it. On the second day, she found a rabbit in one of the traps. She'd cleaned game before with her father, but never alone. It took her twice as long as it should have, and she made a mess of it, but eventually she had meat for the pot. She cooked it slow with the last of the potatoes and some wild onions she'd found near the river, and when she ate it that night, it tasted like victory. The third day, she heard riders. Clara grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, her heart pounding. 3 men on horseback, riding up to the cabin like they owned the place. They were rough-looking, unshaven, dressed in worn coats, the kind of men who made her instincts scream. She opened the door just wide enough to be seen, the rifle visible in her hands. "Help you, gentlemen," she called, keeping her voice level. The lead rider, a big man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, grinned. "Well now, didn't expect to find a lady out here all alone." "I'm not alone. My husband's inside." "Is he now?" The man looked at the cabin, then back at her. His grin widened. "Funny. I don't see any smoke from more than one fire, and those are awfully small footprints in the snow leading to the barn." Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. "What do you want?" "Just being neighborly, checking to see if you need anything." He dismounted and the other 2 followed suit. "These are hard times, a lot of folks struggling. Sometimes people need help, even if they don't know it. We're managing just fine. Are you?" He took a step closer and Clara raised the rifle to her shoulder. He stopped, hands up in mock surrender. "Easy now. No need for that." "I think there is." Clara's voice was steady, though her heart was trying to beat out of her chest. "You've got no business here, so I'm asking you nicely to leave." The man studied her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Then he laughed. "You got spirit, I'll give you that. But a woman alone in the middle of nowhere? That's just asking for trouble." "She's not alone." The voice came from behind the men, and Clara's relief was so intense she almost dropped the rifle. Ethan stepped out from the tree line, his own rifle trained on the riders. He looked like he'd ridden hard, covered in dust, his face drawn, but his hands were steady. "Ethan Rowe," the scarred man said, his grin fading. "Heard you were in Billings." "Got back early. Lucky for me." Ethan moved closer, putting himself between the men and Clara. "Now I'm going to ask you once and only once. Get on your horses and ride out. Don't come back." "Or what?" "Or I put a bullet in you and claim you were trespassing, which you are." Ethan's voice was flat, emotionless. "Your choice." The tension stretched out, thick and dangerous. Clara kept her rifle up, her finger on the trigger, ready to fire if Ethan gave the signal. Finally, the scarred man shook his head. "Not worth it. Come on, boys." They mounted up and rode out, slow and deliberate, making it clear they weren't scared. But they left, and that was what mattered. Clara didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the cabin steps. Ethan was beside her instantly, taking the rifle from her shaking hands. "You all right? I thought you weren't coming back for 2 more days. Sold the cattle faster than I expected. Prices were better in Billings than I thought." He set the rifle aside and pulled her to her feet. "What happened? What did they want?" "I don't know. They said they were being neighborly, but..." She trailed off, shivering despite the warm sun. "They were going to do something. I could see it in their eyes." "Yeah." Ethan's jaws was tight. "I know those men. Drifters. They move through in the winter looking for easy targets. Homesteads where people are struggling, where they can steal supplies or worse." He looked at her. "Did they hurt you?" "No, but they would have if you hadn't shown up." He pulled her into a hug then, sudden and fierce, and Clara wrapped her arms around him and held on. She could feel his heart hammering against her chest, could feel the tremor in his hands. "I shouldn't have left you alone," he said into her hair. "That was stupid. You didn't have a choice." "I always have a choice." He pulled back enough to look at her. I'm sorry. You're here now. That's what matters. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the weak sunlight. Then Ethan stepped back, clearing his throat. I got $110 for the cattle, he said. It's not enough, but it's a start. How much more do we need? At least 90, maybe 100, depending on penalties. He ran a hand through his hair. I've been thinking about it the whole ride back. There might be a way. Tell me. The Callahans mentioned a cattle drive coming through next month. They're looking for hands, people willing to help move a herd to the railhead. Pays well, but it's brutal work. 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. So you'd leave again? Yeah, but if I can make $60, $70 combined with what we've got... He trailed off, hopeful but cautious. Clara did the math in her head. It could work. It's risky. I'd be gone for weeks, and you'd be here alone again. I can handle it. Clara, I can handle it, she said firmly. We don't have a choice, remember, so we do what needs doing. Ethan searched her face, then nodded slowly. All right, but we're doing this right. I'm teaching you everything I know before I leave. How to handle problems with the animals, how to make repairs, how to defend yourself against more than just wolves. When does the drive leave? 3 weeks. Then we'd better get started. The next 3 weeks were the hardest Clara had ever worked. Ethan pushed her relentlessly, teaching her skills she'd never imagined needing. How to shoe a horse, how to splint a broken leg on a cow, how to read the weather and know when a storm was coming, how to shoot accurately at different distances in different conditions. Again, he'd say when she missed a target. Again, when she fumbled a knot. Again, when she couldn't get the rhythm right on chopping wood. Some days she wanted to scream at him, some days she wanted to cry. But she kept going because she understood what he was doing. He was making sure she'd survive without him. At night, they fell into bed exhausted, Clara on the narrow mattress and Ethan on his pallet on the floor. But one night, about a week before he was set to leave, she heard him moving restlessly and spoke into the darkness. Can't sleep? No, you? No. Clara hesitated. You could... The bed's not that small. We could share it, just for warmth. There was a long silence. Then she heard him stand, heard his footsteps cross the cabin. He lay down on top of the blankets, keeping space between them, and Clara turned onto her side to face him. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for giving me a chance when no one else would. You don't need to thank me. You've earned your place here 10 times over. Have I? She studied his face in the dim firelight. Sometimes I feel like I'm still trying to prove myself. To who? Me? Ethan shook his head. Clara, you stood down wolves with a rifle you'd barely fired. You survived a blizzard that would have killed most people. You faced down those drifters without flinching. What more proof do you think I need? I don't know. She trailed off, struggling for words. I'm not used to being wanted, being valued. My whole life, I've been something people tolerated or tried to get rid of. Well, you're not anymore. His hand found hers in the dark, his fingers rough and warm. You're my partner, my wife, and I want you here. The words settled into Clara's chest like warmth, like coming home. I want to be here. They lay like that, hands joined until sleep finally claimed them both. The morning Ethan left for the cattle drive, Clara woke before dawn to make him breakfast. She cooked everything they had left. Eggs from the few chickens still laying, the last of the bacon, bread fried in the grease. It was too much food, probably, but she wanted him to leave with something good in his stomach. He ate without speaking, his movements mechanical. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. I'll be fine, she said finally. Stop worrying. Can't help it. Try anyway. I need you focused on staying alive out there, not distracted thinking about me. He set down his fork and looked at her. What if something happens? What if you need help and I'm not here? Then I'll go to the Callahans, or I'll handle it myself. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. We've come this far. We can make it a little farther. Yeah. He squeezed her fingers. We can. When it was time to go, he stood in the doorway with his pack slung over his shoulder, looking at her like he was trying to memorize her face. 3 weeks, he said. Maybe less if we move fast. I'll be here when you get back. I know. He stepped forward and, for the first time since she'd arrived, kissed her. It was brief and chaste, just a press of lips, but it sent heat flooding through Clara's entire body. When he pulled back, his ears were red. "I'll see you soon." "Ethan?" Clara caught his arm before he could leave. "Come back safe, please." "I will, promise." Then he was gone, walking toward the Callahan place where the drive would assemble. Clara stood in the doorway until she couldn't see him anymore, then closed the door and leaned against it, her fingers pressed to her lips. The cabin felt unbearably empty without him. The first week alone was manageable. Clara fell into a routine: feed the animals, check the traps, haul water, make repairs. She found a leak in the barn roof and patched it herself, though it took 3 tries to get it right. She started a small garden near the cabin, turning over frozen earth until her hands blistered. The second week was harder. A late storm rolled through, nothing like the blizzard, but enough to make her nervous. She brought the remaining cattle close to the barn and stayed up all night watching them, the rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound. The third week, she started marking days on the wall with a piece of charcoal. 17 days. 18. 19. On the 21st day, she heard horses and grabbed the rifle before remembering to check who it was first. Mary Callahan sat astride a sturdy mare, a basket tied to her saddle. She took one look at Clara and shook her head. "You look terrible." "Thank you," Clara said dryly. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Clara tried to remember and couldn't. "I've been eating." "Uh-huh." Mary dismounted and pushed past her into the cabin. She looked around, taking in the sparse supplies, the tally marks on the wall, the single plate and cup by the basin. "You're not taking care of yourself." "I'm managing." "That's not the same thing." Mary set the basket on the table and started unpacking: bread, cheese, apples, dried meat. "Ethan asked me to check on you. Good thing I did." Clara felt her throat tighten. "He did?" "Before he left. Made me promise I'd make sure you weren't working yourself to death." Mary shot her a knowing look. "Seems like you're doing exactly that." "There's too much to do. I can't." "You can, and you will, starting now." Mary pointed at a chair. "Sit, eat. I'll tell you what's happening in the world outside this homestead." Clara sat because arguing seemed more exhausting than obeying. Mary handed her bread and cheese, and Clara ate mechanically while Mary talked about the Callahan's farm, about the neighbors, about the cattle drive. "They're making good time," Mary said. "Should be back in less than a week." "You've heard from them?" "John got word from a rider passing through. Everyone's healthy, no major problems." She smiled. "Your husband's doing fine, Clara. You can stop worrying." Clara nodded, but the anxiety didn't ease. She wouldn't stop worrying until she saw him with her own eyes. Mary stayed for a few hours, helping Clara clean the cabin and check the animals. When she left, she made Clara promise to come for dinner in a few days if Ethan wasn't back. "You don't have to do everything alone," Mary said. "That's what neighbors are for." Clara stood in the doorway and watched her ride away, feeling less alone than she had in weeks. Ethan came back on the 24th day. Clara was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when she heard the horse. She dropped the pitchfork and ran outside, her heart in her throat. He looked exhausted, thinner than when he'd left, his face burned dark by the sun, his clothes filthy with dust and sweat, but he was smiling, and when he saw her, his smile widened. "Hey," he said, swinging down from the saddle. "Hey, yourself." Clara wanted to run to him, to throw her arms around him, but she held back. "You made it." "I did." He pulled a leather pouch from his saddle and tossed it to her. She caught it, felt the weight of coins inside. $73. Plus what we already had, that's more than enough. Clara stared at the pouch, then at him. "We're going to keep the land?" "We're going to keep the land." The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. She laughed, sudden and sharp. And then she was crying, tears streaming down her face. Ethan crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "We did it," Clara said against his chest. "We actually did it." "Yeah," his voice was rough. "We did." They held each other in the yard, the sun warm on their backs. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara felt like she could breathe. That night they celebrated with a real meal. The supplies Mary had brought plus fresh rabbit Clara had trapped. They ate at the small table, talking about everything and nothing, and when they finished, Ethan reached across and took her hand. There's something I want to say, he said. Something I should have said before I left. Clara's heart kicked. All right. When I sent for a wife, I thought I was looking for help. Someone to make this easier. But that's not what happened. He met her eyes. You didn't make it easier. You made it possible. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being a partnership and started being... He trailed off, struggling for words. I don't know what to call it. A marriage, Clara said quietly. A real one. Yeah. He squeezed her hand. But only if you want that. I'm not going to force... She leaned across the table and kissed him, cutting off his words. This kiss was different from the brief one he'd given her before leaving. This was deliberate, wanting, full of everything they'd been holding back. When they pulled apart, Ethan's eyes were dark. That answer your question? Clara asked. Yeah. His voice was hoarse. It does. They made it official 3 days later at the Callahan place, with Mary and John standing witness. It was nothing like the grand ceremonies Clara had imagined as a girl. No white dress, no flowers, no crowd of well-wishers. Just 4 people in a simple cabin, speaking plain words that bound 2 lives together. Do you take this woman as your wife? John asked, reading from a worn book. I do, Ethan said, his hand steady in Clara's. And do you take this man as your husband? Clara looked at Ethan, at his scarred hands and weathered face, at the man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through wolves and storms and desperation, who'd taught her that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up. I do, she said. John closed the book. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan kissed her, soft and sure, and Clara kissed him back. When they separated, Mary was crying and laughing at the same time, pulling them both into a hug. Welcome to the family, she said. Both of you. They rode back to the homestead as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Clara sat in front of Ethan on the saddle, his arms around her, and for the first time in her life she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. You scared? Ethan asked quietly. Of what? Of this. Of us. He paused. Of what comes next? Clara thought about it. No, she said finally. I'm not scared. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it. Together. Together, Ethan echoed, and Clara could hear the smile in his voice. They reached the cabin as darkness fell, and Ethan helped her down from the horse. Clara looked at the small building, rough and unfinished, but home, and felt something settle deep in her chest. They'd survived the worst winter could throw at them. They'd saved the land, and they'd found something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed: each other. That first night as a properly married couple, Clara lay awake long after Ethan had fallen asleep beside her. She listened to his breathing, slow and even, the sound of someone finally at peace, and tried to reconcile the reality of her life with everything she'd imagined back in Philadelphia. She'd thought marriage would be a cage, another set of walls closing in. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't known existed, a partnership built on honesty and necessity and the kind of trust that only came from surviving the worst together. Ethan shifted in his sleep, his arm draping across her waist, and Clara felt the weight of it like an anchor, not holding her down, holding her steady. She closed her eyes and slept. Morning came cold and bright, and Clara woke to find Ethan already up, building the fire. He glanced over when he heard her moving. Thought I'd let you sleep, he said. You earned it. Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. What time is it? Early. Sun's barely up. He fed another log into the fire, watched it catch. I've been thinking about the land. What we need to do next. Already planning? Can't help it. He turned to face her, and Clara saw the familiar determination in his eyes, the same look he'd had when he'd dragged her through that first blizzard. We saved the homestead, but we're still barely hanging on. We need to think bigger. Clara stood and moved to the basin, splashing cold water on her face. Define bigger. More cattle. We need to rebuild the herd, get it up to at least 30 head before next winter, and we need to finish the barn, build a proper chicken coop, maybe start on a second room for the cabin. He was warming to the subject now, his hands moving as he talked. If we work smart, use the money we've got left to invest in the right places, we can turn this into something real, something sustainable. That's a lot of work. I know. But we can do it. He looked at her. If you're willing. Clara thought about the life she'd left behind, the cramped rooms, the constant fear, the suffocating sense that she'd never be more than what other people decided she could be. Then she thought about the last few months, the brutal cold, the backbreaking work, the moments when she'd been certain they wouldn't make it. And underneath all of it, the slow, steady realization that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. I'm willing, she said, but we do it right this time. No more half measures, no more just barely surviving. Agreed. Ethan smiled and Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. We'll need help, though. Can't do everything ourselves. The Callahans? For some of it. But I was thinking we could hire a hand just for the heavy work, fence building, barn raising, that kind of thing. It'd eat into our savings, but it'd save us months of time. Clara considered. How much would it cost? Depends on who we get and for how long. But probably $30, $40? He saw her expression and added quickly, I know it's a lot, but think of it as an investment. We pay now, we get ahead. We don't, we'll still be struggling come next winter. He was right, and Clara knew it. All right, we find someone we can trust and we do it. There's something else. Ethan hesitated, his fingers drumming against his thigh, a nervous tell Clara had learned to recognize. The tax office. I need to ride into town next week. Pay what we owe, get the paperwork sorted. I was thinking, maybe you should come with me. Clara blinked. To town? Yeah, you haven't been anywhere except the Callahan place since you arrived. Thought you might want to see Carter's Bend. Meet people. Maybe pick up supplies you actually want instead of just what I think we need. The offer surprised her. Most men she'd known would have handled business alone, kept their wives separate from anything involving money or legal matters. But Ethan was offering her a place at the table. I'd like that, Clara said. Thank you. Don't thank me. You are my partner, remember? That means you get a say in everything. They rode to Carter's Bend 3 days later, both of them on horseback, saddlebags packed with the money and paperwork. The town was bigger than Clara expected, maybe 200 people, with a main street lined with storefronts and a church at one end. It looked almost civilized compared to the wilderness they'd been living in. The tax office was a small building near the land office, run by a sour-faced man named Henderson, who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. He checked their paperwork with agonizing slowness, counting the money twice, then a third time. Everything appears to be in order, he said finally, his tone suggesting he was disappointed he couldn't find a problem. Your claim is secure for another year. You'll need to make improvements, value of at least $100, to maintain it. We will, Ethan said. Henderson stamped the papers and slid them across the desk. See that you do. Too many people come out here thinking they can homestead, then give up when it gets hard. Waste of good land. Clara felt her temper spike. We're not giving up. Henderson looked at her like he was noticing her for the first time. You his wife? I am. He sniffed. Well, we'll see how you feel come next winter. Outside, Ethan put his hand on Clara's arm before she could march back in there. Let it go. He's not worth it. He's an ass. Yeah, but he's an ass who just secured our claim, so we smile and move on. He steered her toward the general store. Come on, let's get supplies and forget about him. The general store was warm and crowded, smelling of coffee and leather and lamp oil. Clara wandered the aisles while Ethan talked to the proprietor, touching bolts of fabric, jars of preserves, a set of real glass windows that cost more than they could afford but made her chest ache with wanting. See anything you need? Ethan appeared beside her, a sack of flour over his shoulder. Want, mostly. Not need. Want's important, too. He nodded at the fabric. You should get some. Make yourself a new dress. We can afford a few yards of cloth, Clara. You've been wearing the same 2 dresses for months. You deserve something new. Clara ran her fingers over a bolt of dark blue cotton, practical but prettier than anything she owned. Are you sure? I'm sure. She picked out 3 yards, along with thread and needles, and tried not to feel guilty about the expense. Ethan added it to their order without comment, along with sugar, salt, coffee, and a new axe head to replace the one that had cracked. As they were leaving, a woman stopped them on the street. She was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. You're the Rose, aren't you? She said. Heard you had quite a winter. Word travels, Ethan said carefully. It does in a town this size. The woman extended her hand. Martha Grayson, my husband and I run the sawmill north of here. Heard you're looking to make improvements to your place. Ethan shook her hand. We are. Then you'll need lumber. I can give you a fair price, better than you'd get from anyone else. And if you need advice on building, my husband knows more about construction than anyone in 3 counties. We'll keep that in mind, Ethan said. Thank you. Martha nodded, then looked at Clara. You settling in all right, Mrs. Rowe? I am, Clara said, surprised by the question. Good. It's hard country for women, harder than men want to admit. She smiled, and it softened her whole face. But there's good women out here if you know where to look. Mary Callahan speaks highly of you, says you've got backbone. Mary's kind. Mary's honest. There's a difference. Martha patted Clara's arm. You ever need anything, advice, help, or just someone to talk to who isn't a man, you come find me. We take care of our own out here. She walked away before Clara could respond, disappearing into the crowd. Clara looked at Ethan, who shrugged. Told you. Word travels. They rode back as the sun was setting, the horses loaded with supplies, both of them tired but satisfied. Clara felt something settling in her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. These people knew who she was now, knew what she and Ethan had survived, and instead of judgment, they'd offered respect, maybe even friendship. Winter's grip finally broke in mid-March. Snow melted in earnest, revealing brown grass and mud and all the damage the cold had done. Fences were down in a dozen places. The barn roof had more leaks than they'd realized, and the cattle that had survived were so thin Clara could count their ribs. But there were also signs of life returning, green shoots pushing through dead grass, birds singing in the mornings, the river running high and fast with snowmelt. Spring, Ethan said, standing beside her on the porch one morning. Finally. They threw themselves into work with renewed energy. Ethan rebuilt fences while Clara planted a proper garden, vegetables she'd bought seeds for in town, along with herbs for cooking and medicine. They hired a man named Sam Tucker to help with the heavy work, a quiet fellow in his 40s who'd lost his own homestead to debt and was saving to start over. Good worker, Ethan told Clara after Sam's first week. Knows what he's doing. Doesn't complain. Sam helped them raise the barn walls, finish the roof, build a chicken coop that actually kept the foxes out. In the evenings, he'd eat with them, then sleep in the barn. He didn't talk much, but Clara saw the way he looked at their land, with the same hunger she'd felt when she first arrived. The need for something to call his own. On his last day, Ethan paid him and then said, If you're interested, there's more work here come fall. Haying, mostly. Preparing for winter. Pay's not great, but it's steady. Sam looked at him for a long moment. You mean that? Wouldn't offer if I didn't. Then yeah, I'm interested. He shook Ethan's hand. Thank you. Both of you. After he left, Clara turned to Ethan. We can afford to hire him again? If we're smart, yeah, and I think we will be. He looked out at the land, the new fences, the finished barn, the garden starting to sprout. We're building something here, Clara, something that lasts, but we can't do it alone. No, Clara agreed. We can't. In late April, the first calf was born. Clara heard the cow lowing in distress and ran to get Ethan, who'd been working on the corral. They found the heifer down, straining, clearly struggling. First birth, Ethan said, kneeling beside her. Sometimes they need help. What can we do? I need to check the calf's position. If it's breech, we'll have to turn it. He looked at Clara. This is going to be messy. You sure you want to stay? I'm staying. It took an hour of careful work, Clara holding the heifer's head and talking to her softly while Ethan worked. The calf finally came in a rush of blood and fluid, landing in the straw like a wet miracle. For a terrible moment, it didn't move. Then it shook its head, sneezed, and tried to stand on legs that didn't quite work yet. The heifer turned, lowing softly, and started cleaning her baby. Ethan sat back on his heels, his arms bloody to the elbows, his face exhausted but smiling. That's one, he said. Hopefully the rest are easier. They weren't all easy. They lost one calf to a difficult birth and another was born too small and died within hours. But by the time spring turned to early summer, they had 6 healthy calves, and the herd was starting to look like a herd again. Clara stood at the fence one evening watching them graze and felt something close to pride. "They're beautiful," she said when Ethan came to stand beside her. "They're scraggly and half wild, but they're ours." He put his arm around her waist. "We did that. Kept them alive. Helped them grow." Clara leaned into him. "We did." The summer brought its own challenges. Heat instead of cold, drought instead of blizzards. They had to haul water constantly, keeping the garden alive, making sure the animals had enough to drink. Clara's hands were perpetually raw, her skin burned dark by the sun. But she was stronger now, harder. She could work from dawn to dusk without collapsing. One afternoon in July, she was weeding the garden when she heard horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 riders approaching. For a moment, her heart seized. The drifters come back, but then she recognized John Callahan in the lead. The other 2 riders were strangers, though. A man and a woman, both young, both looking overwhelmed and lost. "Afternoon, Clara," John called. "Hope we're not disturbing you." "Not at all." Clara pulled off her gloves and walked to meet them. "What brings you out?" "These 2. John gestured at the couple. "James and Sarah Mitchell, just arrived from Ohio, looking to homestead. Thought you and Ethan might be willing to give them some advice." Clara looked at the couple and saw herself 6 months ago, scared, determined, in over their heads. Sarah was holding her husband's hand so tight her knuckles were white. "Of course," Clara said. "Come inside. I'll make coffee." Ethan came in from the barn while Clara was putting the pot on to boil. He shook hands with the Mitchells, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Homesteading's hard," he said bluntly. "Harder than you think. Winter will try to kill you, summer will wear you down, and there's no guarantee you'll make it." Sarah's eyes widened, but James set his jaw. "We're prepared for hard work. Being prepared and surviving are different things." Ethan sat down at the table. "But if you're serious, we can help. Tell you what to expect, what you'll need." They spent the next 2 hours talking, Clara and Ethan laying out everything, the costs, the dangers, the brutal reality of frontier life. But they also talked about the rewards, the freedom, the pride of building something with your own hands. "It's worth it," Clara said finally. "If you're willing to fight for it, but you have to fight together. Can't survive this alone." Sarah looked at her husband, then back at Clara. "You survived." "Barely, and only because we learned fast." Clara poured more coffee. "First winter we lost cattle, nearly lost ourselves. But we learned, and we got stronger. When the Mitchells left, they looked less overwhelmed and more determined. Clara watched them ride away with the Callahans and felt something shift in her chest. "We're the experienced ones now," she said to Ethan. "When did that happen?" "When we stopped just surviving and started living." He put his arm around her shoulders. "Come on, let's get back to work." By August, the garden was producing more than they could eat. Clara spent days preserving, making jams, pickling vegetables, drying herbs. The root cellar Ethan had dug was slowly filling with supplies for winter. "We're going to make it," Clara said one evening, looking at the shelves of preserved food. "Really make it this time." "We are." Ethan pulled her close. "But we need to talk about something." Clara's stomach tightened. "What?" "Money. We're doing better, but we're still tight. I've been thinking about taking on more work, maybe helping with the Mitchell place or hiring out for harvest work." He paused. "But that means leaving you alone again." "I can handle alone now." "I know you can, but I don't want to." He turned her to face him. "I'm tired of leaving, tired of being apart. I want to build this place up enough that I don't have to. So what do? We sell 2 of the steers, get a cash cushion, then we focus on improvements, things that'll increase the land's value. Maybe bring in more livestock next spring, expand the herd." He took her hands. "It'll take time, maybe years, but we can build something real here, something that lasts." Clara looked at their joined hands, his scarred and rough, hers calloused and strong. "Then that's what we do." September brought the first frost, and with it, a letter. Clara found it when she went to the Callahans' place to trade eggs for milk. Mary handed it to her with curious eyes. "Came through last week's post, addressed to you." Clara turned the envelope over. The handwriting was familiar, and her stomach dropped. Thomas. Her brother had found her. She waited until she was home to open it, her hand shaking. Ethan watched from the table but didn't ask. The letter was short. Clara, I heard you married some homesteader in Montana. Good for you. Hope you're happy freezing your ass off in the middle of nowhere. I'm broke, lost everything, need money. $500 would square things. You owe me that much. If I don't hear back in a month, I'll come out there myself. I know where you are. Thomas Clara read it twice, then handed it to Ethan without a word. He scanned it, his jaw tightening. He's threatening you. He's desperate. Clara sat down heavily. $500. We don't have that. We'll never have that. Doesn't matter. You don't owe him anything. He's my brother. He's a drunk who tried to sell you. Ethan's voice was hard. And he doesn't get to show up now and demand money because he ruined his own life. Clara knew he was right. But old habits died hard, and she'd spent years trying to please Thomas, trying to be enough. What if he comes here? Then we tell him to leave. And if he doesn't, we make him leave. Ethan moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. You're not alone anymore, Clara. You don't have to be afraid of him. She looked at him. At this man who'd given her everything when she had nothing, who'd stood beside her through every nightmare winter could throw at them. And she made a decision. I'm not giving him anything, she said. Not money, not acknowledgement, nothing. Good. She burned the letter in the fireplace that night, watching Thomas's words turn to ash. It felt like closing a door, like finally, truly, being free. The first snow came in late October, light and almost pretty. Clara stood on the porch watching it fall and didn't feel the familiar spike of fear. They were ready this time. Food stored, firewood stacked, the barn and cabin tight against the cold. Ethan came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. You scared? He asked. No. And she meant it. We know what we're doing now. Yeah, we do. Winter came hard, but they were harder. They'd learned from the previous year, knew how to pace themselves, how to read the weather, when to push and when to rest. They lost only one cow, an old one who'd been sick since fall, and the rest of the herd stayed healthy. In January, Clara realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. When she finally told Ethan, he went very still. You're certain? He asked. As certain as I can be without a doctor. She searched his face. Are you all right with this? All right? He let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. Clara, He stopped, shook his head. I'm terrified, and happy, and terrified again. Me too. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. We'll figure it out, same as everything else. Yeah, we will. The pregnancy was hard. Clara was sick most mornings, exhausted by afternoon, but she kept working because there was no choice. Ethan tried to take on more of the load, but she wouldn't let him do everything. I'm pregnant, not dying, she said when he tried to stop her from hauling water. I can still work. I know, He ran a hand through his hair. I'm worried. Don't be. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine. But privately, she was terrified too. She'd seen women die in childbirth, knew the risks. Out here, with the nearest doctor 30 miles away, those risks multiplied. Mary Callahan came to check on her in March, took one look at her, and nodded approvingly. You're doing well, strong, the baby's positioned right. How can you tell? I've birthed 6 of my own and helped with a dozen others. I know what I'm seeing. Mary patted her hand. You'll do fine. But when your time comes, you send Ethan to get me. I'll be here. The baby came in late April, 2 weeks early, and in the middle of the night. Clara woke to cramping pain and knew immediately what was happening. Ethan, she said, shaking his shoulder. It's time. He was up instantly, pulling on clothes, moving with controlled panic. I'll get Mary. You stay here. Don't. I'm not going anywhere. Clara tried to smile, but another contraction hit, and she gasped instead. Just hurry. He rode like the devil was chasing him, and Mary arrived an hour later with her supplies and her calm competence. She sent Ethan outside. You'll just be in the way. And stayed with Clara through the long, brutal hours of labor. That's it, Mary said as Clara pushed. You're doing good. Almost there. The pain was beyond anything Clara had imagined, a tearing, burning agony that made her scream. But underneath it was determination. She'd survived winter. She'd survived wolves. She could survive this. The baby came with a rush, and Mary caught her, a tiny, red-faced girl who let out a wail that filled the cabin. "A daughter," Mary said, placing her on Clara's chest. "Healthy and loud. Congratulations." Clara looked down at the baby, her baby, and felt something crack open in her chest. Love, immediate and overwhelming, mixed with terror. This tiny person was depending on her, needing her, and Clara had no idea what she was doing. "You're all right," Mary said gently, reading her expression. "Every new mother feels this way." "I don't know how to be a mother." "Neither did I with my first. You learn." She cleaned up efficiently. "I'll get your husband. He's worn a trench in the yard pacing." Ethan came in looking pale and shaken. He stopped when he saw Clara holding the baby, his eyes going wide. "Come meet your daughter," Clara said softly. He crossed the room slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. When he looked down at the baby, his whole face changed. "She's so small." "She's perfect." "Yeah." His voice cracked. "She is." They named her Anna, after Clara's mother. And in the weeks that followed, Clara learned what real exhaustion felt like. Anna cried constantly, slept rarely, and needed constant attention. Clara stumbled through her days in a fog, trying to care for the baby and keep the homestead running. "Let me help," Ethan said when he found her crying in the barn one afternoon, overwhelmed and sleep-deprived. "You're helping. You're doing everything. Then let me do more." He took Anna from her arms. "Go sleep. I'll watch her." "You don't know. I can figure it out. Go." Clara went, and when she woke 4 hours later, she found Ethan in the rocking chair he'd built, Anna asleep on his chest, both of them peaceful. Something in her chest eased. They were going to be all right. Summer came again, the second one since Clara had arrived. She worked in the garden with Anna strapped to her back in a sling Mary had shown her how to make. The baby grew stronger, healthier, her eyes turning the same blue-gray as Ethan's. One evening in July, Clara stood on the ridge overlooking their land, the cabin with its new addition, the finished barn, the healthy herd grazing in the pasture. Ethan came to stand beside her, Anna in his arms. "We did it," Clara said quietly. "We really did it." "Yeah." Ethan shifted Anna to his shoulder. "It's not fancy, not easy, but it's ours." Clara looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger a year and a half ago, who'd become her partner, her husband, her home. And she thought about the girl who'd stepped off that train, terrified and desperate and determined. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, stronger, more certain of who she was and what she could do. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Sending for a mail-order bride?" "Not once." He looked at her. "You?" "Not once." Anna made a small sound and Ethan smiled down at her. "What about you, little one? You glad you're here?" The baby yawned, unimpressed, and Clara laughed. They stood there as the sun set, three people who'd become a family, looking out at the land they'd fought for. Winter would come again. There would be more struggles, more hardships, more moments when survival seemed impossible, but they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. Clara had learned something in the brutal Montana wilderness, something she'd carry for the rest of her life. Strength wasn't about never falling. It wasn't about doing everything alone or never being afraid. Strength was about getting back up, about asking for help when you needed it, about choosing to stand beside someone even when it would be easier to walk away. Survival had built the foundation of her life here. The storms, the wolves, the desperate fight to keep the land, all of that had forged her into someone new. But it was love that built a life worth living. Love for Ethan, who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Love for Anna, who'd given her a reason to keep fighting. Love for this harsh, beautiful land that demanded everything and gave back just enough to make it worthwhile. "Come on," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Let's go home." Clara followed him down the ridge toward the cabin with smoke rising from its chimney toward the life they'd built together from nothing. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home wasn't a place. It was choosing, every single day, to stand beside someone and build something worth fighting for. It was the slow, steady work of turning survival into belonging. And no storm, no matter how fierce, could take that away from them.